While waiting for the new edition of the Horus Heresy to drop, I decided to spend some time this week playing around with different basing textures and materials to see what I could possibly do for my new army. One item I picked up to do this was this combination of AK mud texture and puddle effects, because it's kind of built as a all-in-one muddy kind of diorama texture solution. I thought it looked really good on the bases. But as I started playing around with it, I found that there's some tips and tricks here that make it a lot easier to use and get a more realistic look. As you just slap it onto your base without really thinking about it and just apply the puddle effects over top of it, it actually looks pretty bad. To start with, I applied the muddy ground texture pretty thickly over the entire base. This is key here to get a nice thick coverage, as if it's too thin, it'll look just like the Games Workshop textured paint, and you'll lose a lot of the mud effect of it. Also, when putting this on, you want to kind of push it around a bit and let it kind of build up in various valleys, eddies, and peaks, as otherwise, again, it will look very flat and just like kind of ground texture, not actual mud. For example, this base here is one of my earlier tries. I just spread it on fairly thin and doesn't really have that muddy look I'm going for. While this base is drying, I took one of my sculpting tools and gently pushed in various puddles and footprints into the mud with the rounded part of the sculpting tool. It's important here to wet your tool when you press it in to make sure the mud doesn't stick. You want to get a really uneven and undulated texture at this point, as all of these depressions will be able to replace our water effects later on. The other challenge I found with this mud effect is that it dries extremely matte. It doesn't really have much contrast to it and looks pretty boring as a base. So to fix this, once it's dry, I wash the entire thing with Agrax Earthshade and let that dry for about an hour or so. Once the Agrax is dry, I come back over and dry brush it with a medium brown and a light tan, in this case walnut by scale 75 and birch by scale 75, but really any brown and tan will work here. For the stagnant water, I use some of the AK Interactive puddle effects. This is really just a standard acrylic water effect product that you can get from like Woodland Scenics or from a number of other vendors out there. And it's not really that special, just this has a small tint of a green to it. Unfortunately, this tint isn't really strong enough to show when you put the water effects down, so if you want to have a muddier appearance, you need to mix a little bit of acrylic paint into it. So that's what I did here. I mixed a little bit of birch into my water effects, but you have to be careful not to mix in too much, as if you do, you'll just get a glossy paint consistency as you see in these early examples. Instead, you want to add just a small drop of your acrylic paint to your water effect mixture, so it kind of gets to this consistency here, and then gently dab it onto your puddles in the base you put on before. One other thing to keep in mind here too is you want to make sure you put this water effect on pretty thinly actually and build up multiple layers. This is because acrylic water effects have this nasty tendency to kind of pull up at the edges as they dry based on a dehydration process, not a chemical reaction. And what happens is as the water leaves the mixture, it leaves the center part first and it pulls up on the edges of your curve, leaving this kind of inverted convex area that looks terrible actually. This actually gets so bad too if it's put on thickly enough that you'll have these little divots that are very visible in the deepest part of your puddle and looks really bad. So to avoid this again, just apply thinner layers and gradually build them up. The last thing I want to call out here as well is that I also tried the AK Interactive wet ground texture here for a couple of these bases, and I just cannot get it to work. It's way too glossy. It looks pretty bad, I think. And maybe if you mixed it in or applied it alongside the muddy texture, it could work pretty well. But for a basing solution for an army, I just found this too finicky to use, so I'd not recommend picking it up if you have the option to. But yeah, overall, the mud mixture from AK Interactive is pretty good. Again, it requires a few more steps than I'd like to get a good looking base, but it's no more challenging than, say, the Games Workshop method or any other basing techniques I've shown you on this channel before. If you're looking for more basing inspiration, I have a bunch more tutorials on my channel, and I'll link another one right here for you to watch next. As always, thanks for watching, and hobby on.